Hello there, how are you tonight? I hope you're feeling relaxed and ready to slowly drift into another quiet journey through history. Tonight, we travel back nearly 2,000 years to the vast and powerful Roman Empire, a world of towering temples, crowded markets, and grand stone roads. But behind the glory of Rome, millions of people lived a very different reality. They were not citizens, soldiers, or wealthy nobles. They were slaves. Imagine waking before the sun rises, sleeping on a thin mat in a dim corner of a stone house, knowing every moment is spent working for someone else. For many in ancient Rome, this was simply life. Roman slavery was everywhere, in farms, kitchens, mines, workshops, and inside the homes of wealthy families. Some slaves worked under relatively calm conditions, while others faced brutal labor that pushed the limits of human endurance. Tonight, we'll slowly explore what daily life was truly like for these forgotten people of the Roman world. Picture the bustling streets of Rome, merchants shouting, soldiers marching, children running through alleys. But woven into this noise are the silent figures of slaves, carrying baskets, sweeping floors, tending fires. They are everywhere, yet almost invisible. The Romans depended on them. Every meal, every harvest, every stone laid in the empire's vast construction projects was touched by slave hands. And yet, their names are lost, their voices erased, their stories buried beneath the triumphs of emperors and generals. In this journey, we will uncover those stories. We will step quietly into their lives, from the moment they were sold to the faint glimmers of hope. This is not a tale of battles or politics. It is a tale of endurance, of human beings surviving in the shadows of history. As you listen, let the rhythm of the past guide you. Imagine the flicker of oil lamps, the creak of wooden carts, the distant murmur of voices, and beneath it all, the quiet presence of slaves shaping the empire in silence. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into history, consider liking the video and subscribing for more relaxing stories from the past. And before we begin, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step quietly into ancient Rome and into the difficult life of a Roman slave. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Roman Empire at its height. Marble temples gleaming in the sun, senators debating in the forum, legions marching across distant frontiers. It is a world of grandeur, of power, of ambition. But beneath this spectacle lies a hidden truth. Rome was built upon the backs of slaves. Slavery was not an afterthought, it was the foundation. From the earliest days of the Republic, conquest brought prisoners of war into Roman hands. Each victory meant thousands taken from their homelands. Picture the aftermath of a Roman campaign. A city falls, its walls crumbling, its people captured. Soldiers march the defeated into chains, leading them toward markets where their lives will be priced and sold. For Rome, war was not only about territory, it was about supply. Every conquest fed the empire's insatiable demand for slaves. But why did slavery become so central? The answer lies in Rome's ambition. The empire was vast, stretching from Britain to Egypt. To sustain this scale, Rome needed workers everywhere, in fields, kitchens, mines, and workshops. Free citizens could not fill this demand. Slaves became the invisible workforce, the silent machinery that kept Rome alive. In the countryside, slaves tilled the soil, harvested crops, and tended livestock. On large estates, hundreds labored under overseers, producing grain, olives and wine that fed the empire. In cities, slaves cooked meals, cleaned homes, and raised children for wealthy families. In mines, they endured brutal conditions, extracting the metals that fueled Rome's economy. This work was dangerous and exhausting. Even in intellectual life, slavery was present. Educated slaves served as teachers, secretaries, and scribes. They copied manuscripts and managed accounts. Rome's culture, its literature, its administration, all were touched by slave hands. The reliance was so deep, society could not imagine life without it. It was woven into every layer of existence. To be Roman was to live in a world where slaves were everywhere, shaping daily life. Yet this dependence carried tension. The more Rome relied on slaves, the more fragile its system became. Rebellions erupted occasionally, most famously the uprising led by Spartacus, where thousands fought for freedom. Though crushed, these revolts revealed the fear lurking beneath, that its hidden workforce might one day rise against it. Still, the system endured. Laws were written to regulate slavery, and markets thrived. Generations of Romans accepted it as natural. Slavery was not questioned, it was assumed. It was the invisible thread binding the empire together. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine walking through Rome's streets. You see senators in white togas and merchants shouting prices, and everywhere, in the background, slaves carrying water, sweeping floors, tending fires. They are silent, but they are essential. Without them, the empire would falter. Slavery became central to Rome, not by accident, but by design. It was the engine of conquest, the backbone of agriculture, the lifeblood of households, the shadow behind culture. Rome's glory was built upon their labor and their endurance. And so, remember, every temple, every feast, every triumph was shaped by those who had no freedom. The empire's brilliance was inseparable from its darkness. This is the hidden reality of the Roman world. Let us drift deeper into the shadows of Rome and ask a quiet question. Who were these millions of people who lived their lives in chains? The answer is not simple. Slavery in Rome was not confined to one group, one nation, or one class. It was a vast net cast wide across the empire and beyond, pulling in people from every corner of the known world. Imagine the aftermath of a Roman conquest. A city falls, its walls broken. Soldiers march the survivors into captivity. Some are sold immediately in bustling markets, their fate sealed in the clamor of coin and bargaining voices. Others are transported across seas and roads, scattered into households, farms, and mines. War was the greatest supplier of slaves, and Rome's endless campaigns ensured a constant stream of human lives. But not all slaves came from conquest. Debt could drag a free person into bondage. A farmer who failed to pay taxes, or a merchant ruined by misfortune, could be sold to cover what they could not repay. Poverty was a silent chain, binding people as surely as iron shackles. Children, too, were vulnerable. Some were born into slavery, inheriting the status of their parents. Others were abandoned by families who could not feed them, left on the edges of cities where traders collected them. For these children, slavery was not a punishment or a consequence. It was simply the only life they ever knew. Piracy and kidnapping added another layer of fear. Travelers along lonely roads could be seized and sold. The Roman markets did not ask where a slave came from. They asked only what price they would fetch. The diversity was striking. They came from Gaul, Spain, Greece, Egypt, Syria, Africa, each carrying their language and customs. In Roman households, slaves spoke in whispers of distant homelands, of rivers and forests far away. The empire's grandeur was built upon this mosaic of lives, each one uprooted and reshaped by bondage. And yet, not all slaves were alike. Some were strong laborers, destined for farms and mines. Others were skilled artisans, valued for their craft. A few were educated, taken as teachers, secretaries, or physicians. Rome's appetite for slaves was not limited to brute strength. It extended to intellect, skill, and artistry. This variety created a strange paradox. Slaves were everywhere, yet they were invisible. They cooked meals, built roads, taught children, and harvested crops. They were woven into the fabric of daily life. As you imagine this world, picture the crowded slave markets of Rome. Rows of men and women stand silently. Some are examined like livestock, their bodies inspected for strength. Others are questioned for skills. Can they read or teach? The question of who became a slave in Rome is answered not by one story, but by countless stories. The defeated soldier, the indebted farmer, the abandoned child, the kidnapped traveler, all could find themselves in chains. Slavery was not a narrow fate. It was a wide shadow that could fall upon anyone. The hidden workforce of Rome was not a single people, but a multitude. They were the forgotten faces behind the empire's triumphs. Their diversity gave Rome strength, but their suffering gave Rome silence. They were everywhere, and yet nowhere. They were the invisible foundation of the empire. Let us step quietly now into one of the most unsettling corners of Roman life: the slave markets. Imagine the noise first: a crowded square, voices rising like waves, merchants shouting prices, buyers haggling, coins clinking. The air is thick with dust and tension, and in the center of it all, rows of human beings standing silently, waiting to be sold. The Roman slave market was not hidden. It was public, visible, woven into the daily rhythm of the city. Citizens walked past casually, as if buying bread or wine. But here, the goods were people, men, women, and children, displayed for inspection. Picture the scene. A wooden platform rises above the crowd. Slaves are led onto it, one by one. Some are strong, their muscles examined by buyers seeking farm labor. Others are young, their faces studied for beauty or obedience. A few are educated, their skills tested with questions, their answers determining their price. Each person is reduced to a commodity. The process was brutal. Buyers touched, prodded, and inspected slaves as if they were livestock. Teeth were checked, backs examined, scars noted. A slave's body was a measure of value, their humanity ignored. For those standing on the platform, the humiliation was as heavy as the chains. Prices varied. A strong laborer might fetch a high sum, destined for fields or mines. A skilled artisan could be prized as a teacher. Children were cheaper, often purchased in groups, their futures uncertain. The market was a place of calculation where lives were weighed against coin. But beneath the noise, there was silence, the silence of fear, of resignation, of despair. Slaves stood quietly, knowing their voices meant nothing. Their fate was in the hands of strangers. For the buyers, the market was opportunity. For the slaves, it was the end of one life and the beginning of another. A soldier captured in war might find himself sold to a farmer. A child abandoned might be purchased by a wealthy household. A traveler kidnapped might be sent to the mines. The market was the gateway into Rome's hidden world of servitude, and yet, even here, there were glimpses of humanity. Families sometimes tried to stay together, pleading with buyers not to separate them. Some masters purchased slaves with care, seeking loyalty rather than cruelty. But more often, the market was indifferent, tearing bonds apart. As you imagine this scene, let the atmosphere settle around you. The heat of the sun on stone streets, the quiet despair of those waiting to be sold. The slave market was not only a place of commerce, it was a place of transformation. The Romans accepted it as normal. To them, slavery was part of life, and the market was simply another form of trade. But for the slaves, it was the moment everything changed. The moment their past was erased, their future uncertain. The slave markets of Rome remind us of the fragility of freedom. They show how quickly life could be altered. They are the silent heart of Rome's grandeur, the place where the empire's hidden workforce was supplied. And so, as we move forward, remember this image: the crowded square, the wooden platform, the silent figures waiting to be sold. It is here that the story of Roman slavery truly begins. The market's noise fades now. The shouting of merchants, the clinking of coins, the restless shuffle of crowds. In its place comes a quieter tension, the moment when a slave is chosen, purchased, and led away. Imagine standing on that wooden platform, the sun heavy on your shoulders, your eyes fixed on the crowd below. A hand rises, a voice calls a price, and suddenly your fate is sealed. You are sold. The buyer steps forward. Perhaps he is a wealthy noble, dressed in fine robes, his servants trailing behind. Perhaps he is a farmer, hardened by years of toil, seeking strong hands for his fields. Or perhaps he is a merchant, calculating profit, measuring your worth not in humanity, but in labor. Whoever he is now your master. The moment of sale is swift, but its weight is immense. A rope or chain may be placed in your hands, guiding you away from the market. The crowd disperses, the platform empties, but for you, everything has changed. You no longer belong to yourself. You belong to another. The journey to your new life begins immediately. You are led through streets, past temples and taverns, past children playing and soldiers marching. The city is alive, but for you, it feels distant, unreachable. Each step carries you further from freedom, deeper into servitude. If you are purchased for a household, the path may lead to a grand villa. Marble columns rise, courtyards echo with fountains, rooms glow with lamplight. Yet behind the beauty lies your reality, endless duties, constant watch, no escape. You will cook, clean, serve, and obey. If you are purchased for the countryside, the road stretches longer. Dust rises beneath your feet, fields spread wide, and the estate looms ahead. Here, your life will be bound to the soil, plowing, planting, harvesting, from dawn until dusk. The land is vast, but your world will be small, confined to labor and silence. For some, the destination is darker still. Mines carved into mountains, workshops filled with smoke, places where labor is brutal. To be sold into such work is to face a life of exhaustion, where each day is a battle against despair. The first encounter with a master is telling. His eyes measure you, his words command you, his gestures remind you of your place. Some masters are stern, others cruel, a few indifferent. Rarely, a master may show kindness, but even then, the bond is unequal. You are property, and your life is not your own. In this moment, fear and uncertainty settle deep. You do not know what tasks await, what punishments may come, what future lies ahead. The sale has erased your past, and the master's will has written your future. Yet even here, in the quiet halls of servitude, there is resilience. Slaves learned to endure, to adapt, to survive. They found ways to navigate the demands of masters, to carve small spaces of humanity within a system that denied it. As you imagine this moment, let the silence of the market linger. The crowd has gone, the coins have been counted, and you are led away. The sale is complete, and your life has entered a new chapter, one defined not by choice, but by command. Being sold to a Roman master was not only a transaction, it was a transformation. It was the moment freedom ended and servitude began. It was the quiet step into a world where every breath, every movement, every thought was shaped by another's will. The sale is complete. The coins have changed hands. And now you are led away from the crowded market into the quiet halls of a Roman household. The first day is not loud, but it is heavy. Every sound feels sharper. Every glance carries weight. You are no longer a figure on a platform. You are property, absorbed into the rhythm of a new home. Imagine stepping through the doorway of a villa. Marble floors gleam beneath your feet. Mosaics shimmer with color. The air smells faintly of oil lamps and bread baking in the kitchen. It is beautiful, but for you, it is not a place of comfort. The master's eyes fall on you first. He studies you, measuring your strength, your obedience, your silence. His words are brief, commands more than greetings. You are told where to stand, where to sleep, what tasks await. In this moment, your identity is reshaped. You are no longer who you were. You are what he needs you to be. Then comes the mistress of the house. Her gaze is sharper, her expectations precise. She may assign you to the kitchen, to the laundry, to the care of children. Her voice is calm but firm, reminding you that every mistake will be noticed. The household is her domain. Other slaves surround you. Some glance with pity, others with indifference. They know the rhythm of this place. They whisper advice, where to stand, how to move, when to speak. Their guidance is quiet, but it carries the weight of survival. Your first tasks begin almost immediately. Perhaps you are handed a broom, told to sweep the courtyard where fountains murmur softly. Perhaps you are sent to the kitchen, where fires crackle and pots simmer, your hands clumsy as you learn the routines. Or perhaps you are ordered to carry water from the cistern, the weight pressing into your shoulders as you walk carefully. Every movement is watched, every gesture is judged. The first day is not about labor alone. It is about proving obedience. The master and mistress must see that you will bend, that you will follow, that you will not resist. The sleeping arrangements are revealed at night. You are shown a corner, perhaps a small room near the kitchen. The space is narrow, the bedding thin, the air heavy with the scent of oil and smoke. It is not comfort. The silence of the night is filled with whispers. Other slaves murmur in the dark, sharing fragments of their stories. You listen, learning the hidden rules of survival, which overseer is cruel, which tasks are most dangerous. The first day in a Roman household is not loud, but it is overwhelming. It is the moment you realize your life is no longer your own. And yet, beneath the weight of obedience, there is resilience. Slaves learned to endure, to adapt. A whispered joke, a shared glance, a moment of rest. These became fragments of survival. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the quiet halls of the villa, the flicker of lamps on marble walls. It is beautiful, but it is not yours. It is the stage upon which your life will now unfold. The first day is only the beginning. Ahead lies routine, labor, and the endless rhythm of servitude. The day's labor fades into silence. The lamps are extinguished. The voices of the household grow quiet, and the villa settles into its nightly rhythm. For the masters, this is a time of rest, soft beds, thick blankets, and the comfort of privacy. But for the slaves, the night is another reminder of their place in the world. Imagine the sleeping quarters, not grand chambers, but corners and corridors, spaces carved from necessity rather than care. A mat of straw laid on cold stone, a wooden bench in a storeroom, a cramped alcove near the kitchen where the air smells of smoke. Some slept in cellars, damp and dark, their breathing mingling with the scent of grain or wine stored above them. Others lay in narrow passageways, their rest interrupted by footsteps and commands. In large estates, dozens sharing one space, their bodies pressed close. Privacy was rare. A slave's rest was never truly their own. Overseers could enter at any time. Masters could summon them in the night. Sleep was not a sanctuary. It was a pause, fragile and uncertain. In winter, the cold seeped through stone walls, numbing limbs. In summer, the heat lingered, heavy and suffocating, making rest shallow and restless. The body longed for comfort, but comfort was reserved for others. And yet, within these harsh conditions, slaves found ways to endure. A whispered story shared in the dark, a quiet song hummed beneath breath, a stolen moment of laughter before sleep. These fragments of humanity softened the edges of hardship, weaving threads of resilience. Children born into slavery often slept beside their parents, curled together on mats, their small bodies shielded by arms that offered what little protection was possible. Families, separated by labor or sale, carried memories of one another into sleep, dreaming of faces they might never see again. The night was also a time of fear. Punishments could come suddenly, even in darkness. A master's anger, an overseer's suspicional, could shatter the peace. And so slaves closed their eyes, surrendering to exhaustion, knowing that dawn would bring duties once more. Within those moments lay the only freedom they could claim, the freedom of the mind, wandering beyond chains, beyond walls, beyond Rome itself. As you imagine this, let the silence of the villa surround you. The masters rest in comfort, their chambers filled with warmth. The slaves lie in corners, on mats, in cellars, their bodies weary, their minds drifting. The contrast is stark, the division absolute. Sleeping conditions were a reflection of their status. Their rest was as fragile as their freedom, shaped by the will of others. And yet, even in this silence, there was endurance. The night was harsh, but it was survived. The morning would come, and with it, the endless rhythm of labor. The night is short. The mat of straw offers little comfort, and before the body can sink deeply into rest, the sound of footsteps stirs the silence. A door creaks, a voice calls, and the slaves rise. It is still dark, the stars faint above the villa, the air cool. For Roman slaves, the day begins before the sun. Duties wait in the shadows, tasks that must be completed before the household awakens. Imagine the courtyard of a Roman home. Lamps flicker faintly, casting long shadows across stone floors. Slaves move silently, sweeping dust, arranging tools. The world is still asleep, but their work has already begun. Water is the first necessity. Buckets are carried from cisterns or wells. The weight presses into shoulders, the chill biting into hands. The water must be ready for cooking and washing as the day grows. Fires must be lit. In kitchens, slaves crouch before hearths, coaxing sparks into flame, feeding wood until the glow spreads. The smoke curls upward, filling the air with its sharp scent. These fires will cook meals, heat baths, and warm the rooms. Bread must be prepared. Dough is kneaded in the dim light, hands pressing, folding, shaping. The ovens glow faintly. The smell of baking bread begins to drift through the villa, a quiet promise of the day ahead. Animals must be tended. In stables and pens, slaves feed livestock, clean stalls, and prepare beasts for labor. The rustle of hay mingles with whispers. Clothing must be readied. Garments are brushed, folded, and laid out. Jewelry polished, sandals cleaned, and cloaks arranged. The household must appear flawless when the day begins. All of this happens before sunrise, while the masters still sleep. Their dreams are undisturbed, while the slaves labor quietly, shaping the day before it begins. Their work is invisible, yet essential. The overseers watch closely. Their eyes pierce the darkness, their voices sharp, reminding slaves that mistakes will not be forgiven. The tension is constant. Each task must be precise, each movement careful, each duty completed without error. And yet, within this rhythm, there is endurance. Slaves move with practiced steps, their bodies trained to the demands of dawn. They know the sequence, the order, the pace. Their survival depends on it, and their resilience carries them through. As the first light of morning touches the horizon, the household begins to stir. Masters rise, children wake, voices fill the villa. The slaves have already labored for hours. The fires are lit, the bread is baked, the water is ready. The day unfolds seamlessly, as if by magic, but the magic is labor, silent and unseen. Early morning duties reveal the essence of Roman slavery. They show how the hidden workforce sustained the grandeur of Rome. The masters awoke to comfort, but that comfort was built upon the exhaustion of others. The sun has risen now, spilling light across the courtyards and mosaics of the Roman villa. The masters stir from their chambers, children laugh in the halls, and the household begins its daily rhythm. For the slaves, this is the heart of their existence, the endless cycle of domestic work. Household slaves were everywhere. They moved silently through kitchens, corridors, and gardens, their presence constant but often unnoticed. Imagine the kitchen first. Fires crackle, pots simmer, knives scrape against wooden boards. Slaves prepare meals with precision, grinding grain, mixing sauces, roasting meats. The air is thick with the scent of bread, herbs, and smoke. Every dish must be perfect, every portion exact. Others tend to the cleaning, floors swept, walls polished, furniture dusted. Oil lamps are trimmed, their flames steady, their light soft. The villa must gleam, its beauty maintained by hands that will never claim it. Laundry is another duty. Garments are washed in basins, scrubbed with ash and water, wrung and dried beneath the sun. Cloaks brushed, sandals cleaned, jewelry polished until it shines. The slaves ensure that the family appears flawless. Children are cared for by slaves as well. Nurses watch over them, guiding their steps, soothing their cries. A child may cling to a slave with affection, but the slave knows that affection does not erase chains. In the courtyards and gardens, slaves tend plants, prune vines, and water flowers. The beauty of the villa's surroundings is shaped by their labor. The fountains murmur, the paths are swept. Some slaves serve directly at the table. They carry dishes, pour wine, stand silently as masters eat. A spilled cup, a misplaced dish, a clumsy gesture, all could bring punishment. Service is not only labor, it is performance. The rhythm of domestic work is relentless. Tasks flow one into another, the day unfolding in a cycle of labor. There is no pause, no freedom, only the constant demand of duty. The household's comfort is built upon exhaustion. And yet, within this rhythm, there are fragments of humanity. Slaves whisper to one another in kitchens, share glances in corridors. They remind them that they are more than labor, more than property. They are human, enduring together in silence. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you, the flicker of lamps, the murmur of fountains, the quiet footsteps. Household slaves reveal the essence of Roman servitude. The empire's grandeur was maintained by the silent labor of millions. Their presence was constant, their work essential, their lives hidden beneath the surface of history. The morning has unfolded, and now the villa hums with life. The masters are awake, the children chatter, and the household prepares for its most delicate ritual. The preparation and serving of food. For Roman slaves, the kitchen was both a place of endless labor and silent performance. Step into the kitchen. The air is thick with smoke. The glow of fire flickers against stone walls, and the scent of bread and roasting meat fills the space. Slaves move quickly, their hands practiced. Each dish must be prepared with care, for the master's table is a stage of status, a reflection of wealth. Cooking was an art, but for slaves, it was also a burden. Grain was ground into flour, dough kneaded until smooth, loaves baked in radiating heat. Meat was seasoned, skewered, roasted, its juices dripping into flames. Fish was cleaned, salted, and cooked with sauces rich in oil and wine. Vegetables were chopped, stews simmered, fruits arranged in bowls. The kitchen was alive with motion, every sound a rhythm of labor. The head cook, often a slave himself, directed the work. His voice was calm but firm, his eyes sharp, his commands precise. He knew that a single mistake could bring punishment. The kitchen was a place of tension, where perfection was demanded and failure was feared. Serving was no less demanding. Slaves carried dishes into the dining room, their steps measured, their movements graceful. They poured wine into cups, refilled plates, stood silently as masters ate. Their presence was constant but discreet, their service a performance of obedience. Imagine the dining room, reclining couches arranged around low tables, lamps casting soft light, the murmur of voices rising and falling. Masters and guests speak of politics, of trade, of war, and in the background, slaves move silently, ensuring that every need is met. The act of serving was a test of discipline. A spilled cup, a misplaced dish, a clumsy movement, all could bring swift punishment. Slaves learned to move with elegance, to remain invisible, yet essential. Their service was seamless, their presence unnoticed, their labor unending. And yet, within this rhythm, there were fragments of humanity. A quiet glance exchanged in the kitchen, a whispered word in the corridor, a moment of laughter shared before the next dish was carried. These small gestures softened the weight of servitude, reminding them they were more than shadows. Cooking and serving reveal the hidden artistry of slavery. They show how the empire's grandeur was sustained by the silent performance of daily life. The masters feasted, but the feast was built upon exhaustion, upon silence, upon the endurance of those who labored unseen. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you, the crackle of fire, the scent of bread, the quiet footsteps moving through halls. The villa is alive, but its life is sustained by those who remain invisible. Cooking and serving were the essence of Roman domestic life. They reveal the fragility of comfort and the hidden foundation of empire. The villa fades behind us now, and the road stretches outward into the countryside. Here, far from the marble halls of Rome, lies the empire's true foundation, the farms and estates that fed its people, its armies, its cities, and at the heart of these fields were slaves. Imagine the vastness of a Roman estate. Rows of wheat sway in the wind, olive groves stretch across hills, vineyards climb the slopes. The land is alive, but its life is sustained by endless labor. Farm slaves rose before dawn, their bodies weary from the day before, their hands calloused from tools that never left their grip. The rhythm of agricultural labor was relentless, plowing fields with heavy wooden tools, guiding oxen through soil, planting seeds in neat rows. The sun climbed higher, the heat pressed down, and still the work continued. Harvesting demanded speed and precision. Wheat cut with sickles, grapes gathered in baskets, olives shaken from branches. Each crop was vital, each task essential. Overseers watched closely. Their voices carried across fields, sharp commands echoing against the silence of labor. Whips hung at their sides, reminders of discipline, threats against hesitation. Slaves moved quickly, their bodies driven by fear as much as necessity. Mistakes were costly, disobedience punished, exhaustion ignored. The estates were vast, and the labor was divided. Some slaves tended livestock, sheep grazing in pastures, cattle driven across fields, pigs fed in pens. Others worked in orchards, pruning trees, gathering fruit, maintaining groves. Still others labored in vineyards, their hands stained with juice. The cycle of seasons shaped their lives, planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in autumn, preparing in winter. There was no pause, no freedom, only the endless rhythm of the land. The soil demanded labor, and the slaves provided it. And yet, within this harshness, there were fragments of endurance. Slaves sang quietly as they worked, their voices rising softly above the fields. They shared food at midday, bread and olives passed between hands. They whispered stories in the shade, memories of distant homelands. The estates were not only places of labor, they were places of control. Overseers ensured that slaves remained obedient. Punishments were swift, privileges rare, hope fragile. The land was fertile, but for those who worked it, life was barren. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you. The rustle of wheat in the wind, the creak of wooden tools, the murmur of overseers, the quiet endurance of slaves moving through fields. The countryside is beautiful, but its beauty is built upon exhaustion. Farm slaves and agricultural labor reveal the hidden foundation of Rome. They show how the empire's grandeur was sustained not by marble or gold. The bread that fed armies, the wine that filled feasts, the oil that lit lamps, all were born from the labor of slaves. The countryside stretches wide, and within it rise the vast estates that defined Rome's wealth. These were not small farms, but sprawling domains, hundreds of acres of fields, orchards, and vineyards, all sustained by the labor of slaves. To step into one of these estates is to enter a world where servitude was magnified, where the scale of work consumed every breath. Imagine the estate at dawn. The overseer's voice cuts through the silence, summoning dozens, sometimes hundreds, of slaves. They gather in the courtyard, their bodies weary, their eyes heavy, waiting for orders. The tasks are divided, some to the fields, some to the vineyards, some to the olive groves, others to the livestock. The fields stretch endlessly. Slaves plow soil with heavy wooden tools, oxen straining against harnesses, the earth turning beneath their feet. Others scatter seeds, their hands moving quickly, their bodies bent low. The sun climbs higher, pressing heat into their backs, but the rhythm does not falter. The overseer watches, whip in hand, his presence a constant reminder of discipline. In the vineyards, slaves move carefully, pruning vines, tying branches, gathering grapes in baskets. Their hands are stained with juice, their bodies bent beneath the weight of harvest. The olive groves demand patience. Slaves climb ladders, shaking branches, gathering olives in nets. Others press them into oil, their hands slick, their bodies weary. The oil flows, golden and rich. Livestock must be tended, sheep driven across pastures, cattle fed and watered, pigs kept in pens. The sounds of animals mingle with the voices of slaves, a chorus of labor echoing across the estate. The estate is not only a place of work, it is a place of control. Overseers patrol constantly, their eyes sharp. The slaves live in barracks, crowded together, their rest brief, their lives bound to the rhythm of the land. And yet, within this harshness, there are fragments of endurance. Slaves share food at midday, bread and olives passed between hands. They whisper stories in the shade, memories of distant homelands carried into silence. They sing quietly as they work, their voices rising softly above the fields, weaving threads of humanity into the fabric of servitude. The estates were symbols of wealth and power. For the masters, they were places of abundance. For the slaves, they were places of exhaustion, where every day was consumed by labor, where every breath was shaped by command. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you, the rustle of wheat in the wind, the creak of wooden tools. The countryside is beautiful, but its beauty is built upon silence, upon exhaustion, upon the labor of those who had no choice. Life on large Roman estates reveals the scale of servitude. It shows how the empire's grandeur was sustained by soil and sweat. The bread that fed armies, the wine that filled feasts, the oil that lit lamps, all were born from the labor of slaves. The countryside fades, and we descend into the earth, into the darkest corners of Roman labor. Here, beneath mountains and valleys, lay the mines. They were places of wealth for Rome, extracting gold, silver, iron, and copper. But for the slaves who worked them, they were places of suffering, where daylight vanished and hope dissolved. Imagine the entrance to a mine, a narrow opening carved into rock, the air heavy with dust, the silence broken by tools striking stone. Slaves are led inside, their bodies already weary, their faces shadowed by fear. The overseers stand at the entrance, their whips ready. The tunnels are dark, cramped, suffocating. Oil lamps flicker faintly, casting weak light against damp, jagged walls. The air is thick, hard to breathe, filled with the scent of earth and sweat. Slaves crouch low, their backs bent, their hands gripping picks. Each strike echoes through the tunnels, a rhythm of exhaustion that never ends. The labor is brutal. Stone must be broken or extracted, baskets filled and carried to the surface. The weight presses into shoulders, the dust chokes lungs, the heat. Hours pass without pause, the body pushed beyond endurance. Injuries are common cuts, bruises, broken bones. Illness spreads quickly, the damp air breeding sickness. The overseers demand speed, urging slaves to work faster, harder, longer. Punishments are swift, cruelty constant. A stumble, a pause, a mistake, all could bring the lash. Fear drives the labor. The mines are not only places of exhaustion, they are places of despair. Slaves rarely see daylight, their lives consumed by darkness. The rhythm of work erases time, days blending into one another, the future fading into silence. For many, the mines were a sentence without escape, a life that ended in shadows. And yet, even here, there were fragments of endurance. Slaves whispered to one another in tunnels, their voices carrying hope. They shared food in brief pauses, bread and water passed between hands. They sang quietly, their voices rising against the silence, weaving threads of humanity into the darkness. The wealth of Rome flowed from these mines. The gold that adorned temples, the silver that filled coins, the iron that armed legions, all were born from the labor of slaves. The empire's grandeur was built upon their suffering, their silence, their endurance. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you, the flicker of lamps, the echo of tools, the murmur of overseers, the quiet endurance of slaves moving through tunnels. The mines are dark, but their darkness reveals the hidden foundation of Rome. The brutal reality of Roman mines shows the extremes of servitude. It reveals how wealth was sustained by suffering. The masters saw only gold and silver. The slaves saw only darkness. The mines fade into silence, and now we step into another corner of Roman labor, the workshops. Here the air is thick, not with dust from the earth, but with smoke, heat, and the rhythm of tools. These were places of creation, where slaves shaped the materials of empire into objects of daily life. Imagine the workshop at dawn. Fires glow in furnaces, hammers strike against anvils, chisels scrape against stone. The sound is constant, a chorus of labor echoing through narrow streets. Slaves move quickly, their hands skilled, their bodies weary. Each gesture is precise, each movement shaped by repetition. Metalworkers forge tools, weapons, and ornaments. Their hands grip iron heated until it glows. Their hammers fall with force, sparks flying into the air. The heat presses against their skin, the rhythm of labor unending. The weapons that armed legions, the tools that tilled soil, the ornaments that adorned temples, all were born from their hands. Potters shape clay into vessels. Their fingers press, mold, and smooth, the wheel spinning beneath them. Kilns glow, smoke rises, and rows of jars, bowls, and lamps fill shelves. These objects carried water, stored grain, lit homes. They were essential, and they were crafted in silence. Carpenters cut wood, shaping beams, building furniture, crafting doors. The scent of sawdust fills the air, the sound of tools sharp against timber. Their work built homes, shaped ships, sustained trade. Weavers and textile slaves spin wool, weave cloth, dye fabrics. Their hands move swiftly, threads crossing, patterns forming. The garments worn by citizens, the cloaks draped over soldiers, the fabrics traded across seas, all were woven by slaves. Each workshop was a world of labor, a place where skill and endurance merged. Slaves were not only laborers, they were artisans, craftsmen, creators. Their work shaped the daily life of Rome, their artistry hidden beneath the silence of servitude. But the workshops were also places of control. Overseers watched closely, their voices sharp, their punishments swift. Mistakes were costly, disobedience punished, exhaustion ignored. The rhythm of labor was relentless, the demand constant. And yet, within this rhythm, there were fragments of humanity. Slaves whispered to one another as they worked, shared food in brief pauses, exchanged quiet glances in the glow of furnaces. They found moments of resilience, threads of hope woven into the fabric of labor. The products of these workshops filled Rome: tools in fields, vessels in kitchens, weapons in armies, ornaments in temples. The empire's grandeur was sustained not only by conquest and agriculture, but by the silent artistry of slaves. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you: the glow of furnaces, the scent of clay, the murmur of voices, the rhythm of tools striking against stone and metal. The workshops are alive, but their life is sustained by those who remain unseen. Slaves in workshops and crafts reveal the hidden artistry of servitude. They show how the empire's daily life was shaped not by emperors or senators, but by the silent labor of millions. Their presence was constant, their work essential, their lives hidden beneath the surface of history. The clang of hammers and the smoke of workshops fade. And now we step into a quieter, more refined corner of Roman servitude. Not all slaves labored in fields or mines. Some were chosen for their minds, their knowledge, their ability to read, write, and teach. These were the educated slaves, the teachers, the secretaries, the scribes whose servitude was shaped not by brute strength, but by intellect. Imagine a Roman household where children gather in a small room, scrolls laid out before them, wax tablets ready for practice. At the front stands a slave, often Greek, his voice calm, his gestures precise. He teaches letters, numbers, philosophy, and rhetoric. His knowledge is vast, his skill respected, yet his freedom denied. He is both revered and forgotten, shaping the minds of Rome's future. Educated slaves were highly valued. Conquered Greeks, known for their learning, were often taken into Roman households to serve as tutors. Their presence elevated families, their lessons shaping sons who would one day become senators, generals, or merchants. Yet, behind this prestige lay silence. The teacher was a slave, his wisdom bound to the will of his master. Secretaries filled another role. They managed accounts, copied manuscripts, recorded transactions. Their hands moved swiftly across wax tablets, their eyes scanning scrolls, their minds calculating sums. They were the hidden administrators of Rome, ensuring that households, estates, and businesses functioned smoothly. Their work was precise, yet their names erased. Scribes copied texts, preserving knowledge, spreading ideas. Their hands traced letters carefully, their eyes strained in dim light. The literature of Rome, its philosophy, its history, all were sustained by their labor. They were the silent guardians of culture. But even in these roles, the shadow of slavery remained. A mistake in a calculation, an error in a manuscript, all could bring punishment. The whip hung as heavily over the educated slave as over the laborer. Knowledge did not erase chains. It only reshaped them. And yet, within this silence, there was influence. Educated slaves shaped the minds of Rome's elite, guided decisions, preserved culture. Imagine the contrast. In one corner of the empire, slaves toil in mines, their bodies consumed by darkness. In another, slaves teach philosophy, their minds shaping the future. Both are bound, both are silent, both are essential. The diversity of servitude reveals the depth of Rome's reliance, the breadth of its hidden workforce. As you drift deeper into this story, let the atmosphere surround you, the flicker of lamps in study rooms, the murmur of voices. Educated slaves reveal another layer of servitude. They show how Rome's culture and administration were sustained by the silent labor of those denied freedom. Their presence was constant, their work essential, their lives hidden beneath the surface of history. The quiet rhythm of servitude is always shadowed by fear. In Roman households, on estates, in workshops and mines, discipline was the master's tool, a constant reminder that obedience was not optional. Imagine the atmosphere when punishment was near. The air grows tense, voices fall silent, and every slave feels the weight of uncertainty. A mistake has been made, perhaps a dish spilled, a tool broken, a command ignored. The overseer's eyes narrow, the master's voice sharpens, and suddenly the fragile balance of silence is shattered. Punishments varied, but their purpose was always the same: control. A lash of the whip across the back, the sting of leather cutting into skin, a beating with rods, each strike echoing through corridors. Sometimes humiliation was chosen, a slave forced to stand exposed, mocked, degraded before others. The pain was physical, but the deeper wound was the reminder of powerlessness. In harsher cases, punishments became brutal. Shackles were fastened, chains dragged across floors, collars locked around necks. Some were branded, their skin scarred with marks of ownership. Others were confined, locked in dark rooms, denied food or rest. Discipline was constant. Overseers carried whips, their presence a silent threat. Masters spoke commands with authority, their words edged with menace. Slaves lived in fear of mistakes, their bodies trained to move carefully, their voices hushed, their obedience absolute. And yet, within this harshness, there was resilience. Slaves endured, their bodies scarred, but their spirits unbroken. They whispered to one another in the dark, shared fragments of hope, found strength in solidarity. Punishment was meant to erase resistance, but endurance remained quiet and unseen. The fear of discipline shaped daily life. Every gesture, every movement, every word was measured. Slaves learned to anticipate commands, to avoid mistakes, to survive within the boundaries of obedience. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you. The crack of whips, the silence of fear, the murmur of overseers, the quiet endurance of slaves moving carefully through halls and fields. Discipline was not only an act, it was a presence. Punishments and discipline reveal the harsh reality of Roman servitude. They show how the empire's grandeur was sustained by fear and silence. The masters ruled not only with wealth, but with cruelty. The slaves endured not only labor, but the constant threat of pain. Beneath the silence of servitude, Rome carried a constant unease. The empire depended on millions of slaves, and with dependence came vulnerability. What if the hidden workforce rose against its masters? What if silence broke into defiance? This fear haunted Rome, shaping laws, punishments, and the very structure of society. Imagine the whispers in the barracks of an estate. Slaves gather at night, their voices hushed, their eyes glancing toward overseers. They speak of freedom, of escape, of resistance. The words are fragile, but they carry weight. Rome feared these whispers, for they could grow into rebellion. The most famous uprising was led by Spartacus, a gladiator trained to fight for spectacle. He turned his skill against Rome itself. Thousands of slaves joined him, their chains broken, their voices rising in defiance. For a time, they shook the empire, defeating legions, spreading fear across Italy. Rome eventually crushed the revolt, but the memory lingered, a reminder that its foundation was fragile. Other rebellions flared across the empire. In Sicily, slaves rose against masters, seizing estates, fighting for freedom. In cities, plots were uncovered, conspiracies silenced before they could ignite. Each rebellion was a spark, quickly extinguished, but each revealed the tension beneath Rome's grandeur. The fear of rebellion shaped discipline. Punishments grew harsher, overseers more vigilant, laws more strict. Masters sought to divide slaves, to prevent unity, to keep whispers from becoming shouts. Surveillance was constant, suspicion heavy, trust rare. Rome's control was not only physical, it was psychological, and yet the fear was justified. Slaves outnumbered citizens in many regions. Their labor sustained agriculture, workshops, households, mines. If they rose together, Rome would tremble. The empire's strength was vast, but its reliance was dangerous. The masters knew this, and the slaves felt it. Imagine the tension in a Roman household. The master reclines at dinner, his slaves serving silently. Yet in the back of his mind lingers the thought, what if they turned against him? What if obedience dissolved into defiance? The fear was constant, shaping every interaction. The fear of rebellion reveals the fragility of Rome's system. It shows how the empire's grandeur was built not only upon labor, but upon silence enforced by fear. The slaves endured, but their endurance carried the possibility of resistance. Rome's wealth was vast, but its foundation was unstable. As you drift deeper into this story, let the atmosphere surround you, the whispers in barracks, the tension in households, the memory of Spartacus echoing across history. Rome was powerful, but beneath its power lay fear. Fear of the very people who sustained it. Not every moment of Roman slavery was defined solely by punishment, exhaustion, or despair. Within the rigid hierarchy of servitude, some slaves were granted small privileges, fragments of comfort, tokens of trust, or glimpses of humanity. These privileges did not erase chains, but they softened them, offering brief relief in a life otherwise bound by obedience. Imagine a household where certain slaves are allowed closer proximity to the master's family. A trusted servant might be permitted to sleep in a small room rather than a crowded barracks, or to eat scraps from the master's table. These gestures were not generosity in the modern sense. They were rewards for loyalty, designed to secure obedience. Yet, some slaves were allowed to keep personal belongings, a small pouch of coins earned from tips, or a piece of jewelry gifted by a master, a simple wooden carving made in spare time. These possessions were rare, but they were symbols of individuality in a system that sought to erase it. Trusted slaves sometimes managed money or property on behalf of their masters. Secretaries and stewards oversaw accounts and organized estates. Their privilege was not freedom, but responsibility, recognition of their skill and intellect. With responsibility came a measure of respect. In some households, slaves were permitted to form families. Masters occasionally allowed couples to live together and raise children. These unions were fragile, always vulnerable to sale or separation, but they offered moments of humanity within the silence of servitude. Privileges could also take the form of mobility. A slave trusted to run errands might walk through city streets, carrying goods or messages. Though watched carefully, these moments outside the household offered glimpses of freedom, the bustle of markets, the scent of food stalls. For a slave, even brief exposure to the world beyond walls was a privilege. Some slaves were allowed to earn money. Musicians, artisans, or skilled laborers could receive small payments for their work. Sometimes they saved enough to buy their freedom. These opportunities were rare, but they revealed the complex layers of Roman slavery. Privileges were also psychological. A kind word from a master, a gesture of trust, a moment of recognition. These fragments of respect did not erase chains, but they reminded slaves that they were seen, that their humanity was not entirely forgotten. Yet, it is important to remember, privileges were not rights. They were gifts, conditional and fragile, granted at the master's whim. A trusted slave could be punished for a single mistake. A family torn apart by sale. A possession confiscated without warning. Imagine the contrast. One slave sleeps on straw in a crowded barracks, another in a small room with a blanket. One eats coarse bread, another tastes meat from the master's table. One labors in fields under the lash, another manages accounts in quiet chambers. The differences were stark, but the chains were the same. Small privileges revealed the complexity of Roman slavery. They show how masters balanced cruelty with reward, fear with trust. They remind us that slavery was not only a system of labor, but a system of control, one that used both pain and privilege to sustain obedience. As you drift deeper into this story, let the atmosphere surround you, the quiet murmur of trusted slaves in chambers, the laughter of children raised in fragile families, the clink of coins saved in secret. These privileges were small, but they carried immense meaning. They were fragments of humanity in a world that denied it. Slaves endured not only through resilience, but through these privileges. They found strength in possessions, in families, in trust, in glimpses of freedom. Their lives were shaped by chains, but softened by fragments of dignity. Among the countless hardships of Roman slavery, one fragile hope lingered: the possibility of manumission, freedom granted by a master or purchased by the slave. For most, this dream was distant, but for some, it was tangible. The path to liberty often began with coins carefully saved, hidden, and cherished. Imagine a slave in a bustling Roman household. His duties are endless, his obedience constant, but occasionally he is permitted to earn small amounts of money. Perhaps he receives tips from guests for attentive service, or a master allows him to keep a fraction of what he earns through skilled labor. These coins are not much, but they are precious. Each one represents a step toward freedom. Skilled slaves had greater opportunities. Musicians performing at banquets, artisans crafting ornaments, scribes copying manuscripts. Their talents could bring payment from outsiders. Masters sometimes allowed them to keep part of these earnings, knowing that the promise of eventual freedom encouraged loyalty and diligence. For these slaves, saving money was not only survival, it was strategy. The savings were often hidden, a small pouch tucked beneath bedding, coins buried in corners, wealth entrusted to a trusted friend. The risk was constant. Discovery could mean confiscation, punishment, or worse. Yet the hope of freedom outweighed the danger. Each coin was guarded as fiercely as life itself. The process of buying freedom was complex. A slave needed enough money to pay the master's price, which varied depending on age and skill. Some masters set high sums, knowing that few could ever reach them. Others allowed gradual payments, a system called pecuniary. This arrangement gave slaves a measure of autonomy, though always under the master's control. Imagine the moment of negotiation. A slave approaches his master, coins in hand, voice trembling. He offers the savings of years, the weight of hope. The master considers, measuring loyalty, usefulness, and profit. If accepted, the slave is freed, his name recorded, his status transformed. If rejected, the coins vanish, the dream dissolves, and chains remain. Freedom was not guaranteed. Even with money, a master could refuse. Even after manumission, former slaves often remained tied to their patrons, bound by obligations, expected to serve in different ways. Yet the difference was immense. A freedman could marry legally, own property, trade openly, and walk without chains. The dream was fragile, but real. Saving money for freedom reveals the resilience of slaves. Despite exhaustion, punishment, and silence, they found ways to hope, to plan, to endure. Coins became symbols of resistance, of humanity, of the possibility of life beyond servitude. Imagine the contrast. In one corner of Rome, a slave bends beneath the lash, his body consumed by labor. In another, a slave counts coins in secret. Both are bound, but one carries a dream that could reshape his life. The act of saving was more than economics. It was defiance. It was a refusal to accept chains as permanent, a quiet rebellion against the empire's system. Rome thrived on slavery, but within its silence, slaves nurtured the possibility of freedom. As you drift deeper into this story, let the atmosphere surround you. The clink of coins in hidden pouches, the whispers of slaves planning futures, the tense negotiations between master and servant. These moments reveal the fragile balance between obedience and hope, between servitude and liberty. Saving money for freedom was not common, but it was possible. It shows how, even within the harshest conditions, slaves found ways to endure. Their lives were shaped by chains, but their futures could be shaped by coins. For most Roman slaves, life was defined by labor, obedience, and fear. Yet within this harsh reality, there existed a fragile hope, manumission. It was not common, but the possibility of being freed gave meaning to endurance, shaping the way slaves lived, worked, and dreamed. Manumission could take many forms. A master might grant freedom as a reward for loyalty, service, or even affection. A slave might purchase freedom with savings carefully hidden over years. Sometimes, freedom was granted in a will, a master's final gesture. Imagine the moment of manumission. A slave stands before his master, the air heavy with anticipation. Words are spoken, and documents are signed. The chains are not broken with violence, but dissolved with ritual. The slave becomes a freedman, his name recorded, his status changed. He is no longer property, but person. The difference is immense. In formal settings, freedom was declared before magistrates and recorded in registers. In households, it might be a quieter gesture, a master announcing that a trusted servant was now free. The transformation was profound, yet freedom was not absolute. A freedman remained tied to his former master, now called his patron. Obligations of loyalty continued. The possibility of manumission shaped behavior. Slaves worked diligently, hoping to earn trust. They saved coins, nurtured skills, and sought favor. Masters used this hope as a tool, balancing cruelty with reward. For some, manumission was a family's hope, securing futures beyond servitude. Imagine the contrast. In one corner of Rome, a slave bends beneath the lash. In another, a freedman walks through the marketplace, head held high. But manumission was rare. Most slaves never tasted freedom, their lives consumed by labor until death. For many, it remained a dream whispered in silence. And yet the possibility mattered. It revealed the complexity of Rome's system. Slavery was a structure of control, softened by fragments of hope. As you imagine this world, feel the atmosphere. The murmur of ceremonies, the clink of coins, the quiet joy of families reunited. The possibility of manumission reveals how the empire sustained obedience through hope. The slaves endured, dreaming of a freedom fragile yet powerful. The story of Roman slavery does not end with chains. For some, the fragile dream of manumission became reality. They stepped into the world as freedmen. Their lives were transformed, yet never entirely free of the shadow of servitude. The place of freed slaves in Roman society reveals both opportunity and limitation, dignity and dependence. Imagine the moment after manumission. A slave, once bound by obedience, now walks through the marketplace with his head held higher. He can own property, marry legally, trade openly, and speak as a person rather than as property. The transformation is immense. Yet behind this new identity lingers obligation. Freedmen remained tied to their former masters, now called patrons. Bound by respect, loyalty, and service, many became shopkeepers, artisans, or traders, using skills learned in servitude to build livelihoods. Some managed taverns, others crafted goods, others engaged in shipping and trade. Their presence filled Rome's streets. Their labor shaped the daily rhythm of urban life. For them, freedom meant opportunity, though always within boundaries. In households, freedmen sometimes continued to serve, now as clients rather than slaves. They attended patrons in public. This relationship was formalized, woven into Rome's social fabric. Freedom did not erase dependence. It reshaped it into patronage. The children of freedmen carried greater promise. Born free, they could rise higher, entering politics or serving in armies. This generational shift revealed the power of manumission. A freedman's struggle could open doors for descendants, yet prejudice lingered. Freedmen were often viewed with suspicion, their origins remembered, their status marked. They could not hold the highest offices. Rome valued their labor, but never fully embraced them as equals. Imagine the contrast. A freedman runs a shop, his coins his own, his family recognized by law. Yet, in the Senate, his voice is absent. Despite limitations, freedmen thrived. Many became wealthy, their businesses successful. Some built monuments. These monuments reveal pride, resilience, and the desire to be remembered not as slaves, but as citizens. The role of freed slaves shows the complexity of freedom. It was not absolute, but conditional. It carried opportunity and obligation. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you, the bustle of markets, the quiet pride of families. They were reminders that freedom was possible, that chains could be broken, that servitude could be transformed. Their stories remind us that freedom was not only a gift, but a struggle, achieved with resilience, and remembered in stone. Slavery in Rome was not only a system of labor. It was a system that shaped human relationships in profound and often painful ways. Within the barracks of estates, the crowded rooms of households, and the shadows of workshops, slaves formed families and bonds of affection. These relationships were fragile, always vulnerable to separation, yet they carried immense meaning. Imagine the barracks of a large estate. Dozens of slaves lie on straw mats, their bodies weary from the day's labor. In the dim light, couples whisper to one another, children cling to parents, friends share quiet words. These bonds were not recognized by Roman law, but they were real, sustained by love, loyalty, and endurance. Families offered strength in a world designed to erase individuality. Slave marriages were not legally binding. Rome did not grant slaves the right to marry, yet masters often allowed unions for practical reasons. Couples lived together, raised children, and shared lives. Their families were fragile, always at risk of being torn apart by sale or punishment. But they offered moments of humanity within the silence of servitude. Children born to slaves were themselves slaves, property of the master. Their futures were shaped not by family, but by ownership. Yet parents nurtured them, taught them, protected them as best they could. The bond between parent and child carried immense strength, even in the face of chains. To raise a child under slavery was an act of resilience. Friendships flourished as well. Slaves worked side by side, shared food, whispered stories, sang quietly in fields or workshops. These friendships were lifelines, offering comfort, resilience, and solidarity. In a world defined by obedience, companionship was resistance. A friend's laughter could soften exhaustion. A shared story could preserve memory. A song could carry hope. Relationships between slaves and masters added complexity. Some masters allowed favored slaves privileges, forming bonds of trust or affection. Others exploited slaves sexually, blurring lines between intimacy and coercion. These relationships were fraught, shaped by power, defined by inequality. For the slave, affection could never erase chains. Even when trust was granted, it was conditional, fragile, and always shadowed by ownership. The threat of separation was constant. A child sold, a spouse punished, a friend sent to another estate. These losses were devastating, yet slaves endured, forming new bonds, carrying memories, sustaining resilience. Their families were fragile, but their humanity was unbroken. Every reunion was precious, every moment together cherished, because tomorrow could bring loss. Imagine the contrast. A slave couple raises children in barracks, their love strong, but their future uncertain. Another slave forms a friendship in the fields, laughter softening exhaustion. A favored servant shares quiet words with a master, affection mingled with dependence. Each bond is different, but all are shaped by servitude. Families among slaves were fragile, but they endured. They offered strength, resilience, and hope. They reminded slaves that they were more than property, more than labor, more than silence. Their relationships carried humanity into a world that sought to erase it. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you. The whispers of couples in barracks, the laughter of children in courtyards, the quiet songs of friends in fields. These moments reveal the depth of servitude, the resilience of humanity, the fragility of love in chains. Families and relationships among slaves reveal the hidden strength of Rome's workforce. They show how slaves endured not only through labor, but through love, friendship, and solidarity. Their bonds were fragile, but they carried immense meaning, shaping lives in silence, sustaining hope in shadows. Slavery in Rome was not only a system of labor and control, it was also a system that consumed lives from youth to old age. To understand the weight of servitude, we must look at what happened when slaves grew older, when their bodies weakened and the end approached. Aging as a slave was not marked by dignity or rest, but by fragility, uncertainty, and the constant shadow of disposability. Imagine a slave who has spent decades in the fields. His back is bent from years of plowing, his hands calloused from endless labor. Age does not bring retirement, it brings vulnerability. As strength fades, usefulness declines, and with it, the master's interest. In a system that valued productivity above humanity, aging was often seen as a burden. Some older slaves were shifted into lighter tasks. A man too weak for the fields might tend animals or sweep courtyards. A woman no longer strong enough for heavy labor might prepare food, spin wool, or care for infants. These roles were not privileges, they were survival, ways to extract the last measure of usefulness from a body worn down by servitude. For slaves who had formed families, aging carried another fear: separation. An older slave might watch children sold away or spouses punished. Bonds formed over decades could dissolve in an instant. The fragility of family was magnified by age, as the possibility of sale loomed larger. The fate of aging slaves depended heavily on the master. Some masters showed kindness, allowing elderly slaves to live quietly until death. Others were harsher, selling them cheaply, abandoning them, or leaving them to fend for themselves. The difference was stark, but the uncertainty was constant. A slave could never be sure how his final years would unfold. The end of a slave's life was often quiet, unmarked. Few funerals were held, few monuments erected. Death was simply the end of usefulness. Some slaves were buried in communal graves, others in unmarked plots, their names forgotten. Yet within households, fellow slaves remembered, whispering stories, carrying memories, sustaining bonds even after death. For those who achieved manumission, aging carried a different meaning. Freedmen could live with families and prepare for death with dignity. They could be buried with inscriptions, their names remembered. The contrast was immense. Freedom transformed not only life, but death. Imagine the atmosphere, the shuffle of weary footsteps, the cough of sickness, the quiet presence of those too weak to labor. Younger slaves glance at them with both pity and fear, knowing that their own futures may look the same. The barracks carry silence, the workshops carry fatigue, the estates carry shadows of decline. And yet, even in aging, humanity endured. Older slaves shared wisdom, told stories, and offered comfort. Their presence carried memory and resilience. They reminded younger slaves that love and friendship could survive, even in chains. Their lives carried meaning beyond labor. Aging and the end of a slave's life revealed the weight of servitude. They show how Rome valued productivity above humanity. Chains shaped not only youth, but old age. Death was often unmarked. Yet they also reveal the quiet strength of those who endured. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you, the weary footsteps, the whispers of memory, the silence of unmarked graves. These moments reveal the depth of servitude, the fragility of life, and the enduring resilience of humanity. The story of Roman slavery has carried us through mines, workshops, households, punishments, whispers of rebellion, and fragile hopes of freedom. Now, we pause to reflect. Could you endure this life? Could anyone? Imagine waking each day not as a person, but as property. Your body is not your own, your labor not your choice, your future not your decision. Every gesture is measured, every word controlled, every mistake punished. The rhythm of life is not shaped by your will, but by commands shouted by overseers. Could you endure the silence, the fear, the exhaustion? Slaves endured by clinging to fragments of hope. A whispered song in the fields, a shared meal in barracks, a coin saved in secret, a family formed in shadows. These moments carried meaning, but they were fragile, always vulnerable to punishment or separation. Could you endure, knowing that every bond might be broken, every possession taken, every dream dissolved? The whip was never far, the overseer never absent, the threat of discipline constant. A stumble could bring pain, a pause could bring lashes, a mistake could bring humiliation. Fear shaped every movement, every thought, every breath. Could you endure living under constant threat, knowing that your body was never safe? Whispers of resistance carried strength, but also danger. To dream of freedom was to risk punishment. To plot rebellion was to risk death. Spartacus rose, others followed, but most were crushed, their bodies left as warnings. Could you endure the tension between hope and fear, between longing for freedom and fearing its cost? And yet, freedom was possible. Coins saved, loyalty rewarded. Wills written manumission offered transformation. Some slaves became freedmen, their names recorded, their families recognized, their lives reshaped. But for most, freedom remained a dream, fragile and distant. Could you endure working tirelessly for a possibility that might never come? Despite chains, slaves carried humanity. They loved, they laughed, they sang, they remembered. Their resilience was profound, their endurance immense. They found meaning in bonds, strength in solidarity, hope in fragments. Could you endure by holding on to humanity, even when the world sought to erase it? To imagine yourself in this life is to confront the extremes of endurance. Could you survive minds filled with darkness, workshops filled with heat, households filled with silence? Could you endure punishment, fear, fragility, and loss? Could you carry hope in shadows, resilience in chains, humanity in silence? The answer is not simple. Some endured, some resisted, some dreamed, some despaired. Their lives reveal the depth of human resilience, but also the cruelty of systems that deny freedom. To reflect on their endurance is to honor their humanity, to recognize their strength, to remember their silence. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you. The flicker of lamps in barracks, the murmur of overseers in fields, the whispers of families in shadows, the clink of coins saved in secret. Could you endure this life? Perhaps not, yet they did. Their endurance shaped Rome, sustained its grandeur, and revealed the resilience of humanity in chains. The journey through the hidden world of Roman slavery has carried us across mines, workshops, households, punishments, fragile hopes, and whispers of rebellion. We have seen endurance in chains, resilience in silence, and humanity surviving in shadows. Now, as the story draws to a close, let us pause. Imagine the empire at rest. The fields lie silent, the furnaces cool, the barracks dim. The voices of slaves, once constant in toil, fade into memory. Their labor sustained Rome's grandeur. Their silence shaped its rhythm. Their endurance carried its weight. Yet, in the stillness of night, their presence lingers, a reminder of lives lived in shadows. The empire's wealth was vast, but it was fragile, built upon the backs of millions who endured without recognition. Every stone laid, every harvest gathered, every household sustained was shaped by their hands. Their labor was invisible to history. Throughout this story, hope has flickered like a lamp in darkness. Coins saved in secret, families formed in barracks, dreams of freedom carried in silence. These hopes were fragile, often broken, yet they endured. They revealed the resilience of humanity, the refusal to surrender even in chains. Hope was not only personal, it was collective. A whispered song carried strength, a shared story preserved memory, a quiet bond sustained endurance. These fragments of hope remind us that even in the harshest conditions, humanity finds ways to survive. Rome's control was built not only on labor, but on fear. Punishments, discipline, surveillance, suspicion, all shaped the rhythm of servitude. Yet fear was never absolute. Beneath it, whispers of rebellion carried strength, fragments of resistance endured, and the possibility of freedom lingered. The fear of rebellion haunted masters, shaping laws and punishments. Yet for slaves, fear was balanced by resilience. They endured not only through obedience, but through defiance, through hope, through humanity. The story of Roman slavery is not only history, it is memory. It reminds us that empires are built by the silent labor of millions. Their names are forgotten, their voices erased, yet their presence shaped Rome's grandeur. To remember them is to honor their humanity, to give voice to silence, to carry memory into the present. Monuments record emperors, generals, and senators, but the true foundation of Rome lay in the hands of those who labored unseen. Their silence was heavy, but their endurance was profound. As you imagine this world, let the atmosphere surround you. The flicker of lamps in barracks, the murmur of overseers fading into silence, the whispers of families in shadows, the quiet resilience of those who endured. The empire sleeps, but its story remains. Could you endure this life? Perhaps not, yet they did. Their endurance shaped Rome and revealed the depth of human resilience. Their silence was heavy, but their humanity was unbroken. And so, the story closes. The lamps dim, the voices fade, the empire rests. The slaves who endured are remembered, their resilience honored, their silence broken by memory. Good night.